There's a particular kind of argument that doesn't really go anywhere, not because people aren't talking, but because they're talking so much that they circle around each other instead of meeting in the middle. And that strange, almost frustrating loop is where All in the Family finds some of its most honest, and honestly most powerful storytelling, especially in those episodes where the voices rise. The emotions get louder, the energy fills the room, and yet somehow understanding never quite arrives. And I keep thinking about one situation that captures this perfectly, something built around a conversation about race, not as a dramatic external event, but as something that enters the room through everyday life, through a story, a comment, a reaction to something that happened outside, and then slowly takes over everything inside. It begins in that familiar living room, the space that almost feels like another character at this point. Because it shapes everything that happens, it holds the tension. It traps the conversation in a way that makes it impossible to ignore. And Archie is there, comfortable at first, speaking the way he always does, with confidence, with certainty, with the kind of casual language that reveals more than he probably intends. He might mention something about a situation that he interprets in a certain way. And to him, it's just an observation, just a reflection of how he sees things. But to everyone else in the room, it lands differently. It carries weight. It opens a door that can't easily be closed again. Hears it and responds with her usual softness, trying to keep things light, trying to keep the feeling of the room intact, because her instinct is always toward harmony, toward kindness, toward making sure no one feels hurt. But Mike hears something else in Archie's words, something deeper, something that can't be left alone. And when he responds, he doesn't shout, not at first, he just questions, he pushes gently, he asks why, and that's enough to shift the entire tone. Gloria senses it, too, that familiar tightening in the air, that moment where a simple conversation starts to become something more, something that touches on identity, on belief, on the way people see each other and the world around them. And what's remarkable is how slowly it builds, how the show allows the disagreement to grow naturally, without forcing it, without jumping ahead to the explosion. It lets each person speak, respond, react, and in doing so, it creates a rhythm that feels incredibly real. Archie leans into his perspective, not because he's trying to provoke, but because he genuinely believes what he's saying, because his worldview has been shaped over time by experience, by culture, by the environment of 1970s America where conversations about race were often complicated, often uncomfortable, often avoided, or but here, they're not avoided, they're brought into the center of the room, into the center of the story. And that's part of what made the show so groundbreaking, because it trusted the audience to sit with that discomfort, to engage with it, rather than turning away. Mike pushes back, more directly now, more firmly, because for him, these ideas matter, they have consequences. They shape how people are treated, how society functions, and he can't just let them pass without challenge. And as he pushes, Archie responds, not by stepping back, but by pushing in return, by defending his position, by repeating his points, sometimes louder, sometimes with more intensity. Because the more he feels challenged, the more he feels the need to hold his ground. Gloria steps in, trying to mediate, trying to translate, trying to keep the conversation from turning into something purely combative. But she's also affected by it, because this isn't just a debate for her. It's her family, her relationships, her sense of where she belongs in all of this. And quietly, consistently, tries to soften things, to bring the conversation back to something human, something kind. But even her presence can't completely stop the rising tension, because some topics carry too much weight to be smoothed over entirely. The voices rise, not all at once, but gradually, each response a little sharper than the last, each reaction a little more emotional, until the room feels full not of movement, but of sound, of overlapping perspectives, of people trying to be heard. And here, where the show does something incredibly honest, it doesn't move toward resolution. It doesn't guide the conversation toward understanding. It lets it stay messy. It lets the voices rise without promising that they will lead anywhere productive. Because in real life, that's often what happens. People talk, they argue, they repeat themselves, they get louder, they get more emotional, but they don't necessarily reach a place of mutual understanding. The humor that comes through in these moments is almost uncomfortable in itself, because you might laugh at the way Archie insists on his interpretation, or at the way Mike refuses to back down, or at the way Gloria reacts to both of them. But that laughter sits alongside the tension. It doesn't erase it. It's a recognition of how human this all is, how familiar it feels, how close it is to conversations people have in their own lives, in their own living rooms, where the stakes are emotional rather than physical. As the argument continues, it starts to reveal more than just opinions. It reveals insecurities, fears, frustrations that sit underneath the surface of what's being said. Archie might reveal a fear of change, a sense that the world is shifting in ways he doesn't understand, that the rules he's lived by are no longer stable, and that fear comes through in the way he holds onto his points, in the way he raises his voice not just to be heard, but to feel secure. Mike might reveal a frustration with that resistance, a sense that progress is being held back, that important conversations are being avoided or distorted, and that frustration adds urgency to his responses, making them sharper, more insistent. Gloria might show the emotional toll of being in the middle, of caring about both sides, of wanting understanding but not knowing how to get there. And that adds a layer of vulnerability to the conversation that shifts it from purely intellectual to deeply personal. And in her quiet way, continues to offer something different, something that doesn't try to win or even to argue, but to remind everyone that they're still connected, that there's still care, still love, even in the middle of disagreement. But the understanding never quite arrives, not fully, not in a way that resolves the tension. And that's what makes the episode feel so real, so grounded. Because it doesn't pretend that a single conversation can fix everything, can bridge every gap. Instead, it lets the argument run its course, lets the energy build and then slowly fade, not because anything has been solved, but because people reach their limit, because they've said what they can say, because the conversation can't go any further for now. The living room becomes quiet again. The voice is lower, the tension softens, but it doesn't disappear. It lingers in the space, in the relationships, in the way the characters look at each other after everything has been said. And that lingering feeling is what stays with you, because it reflects something true about how people interact, how difficult it can be to truly understand each other, even when they're trying, even when they care. Looking back at it in the context of when it aired, it's even more striking, because bringing this kind of unresolved, uncomfortable conversation into a mainstream sitcom was a risk. It challenged the idea that television needed to provide clear answers, clear resolutions. Instead, it offered something more complicated, something that required engagement, that invited reflection, that trusted the audience to sit with uncertainty. And that's why it still feels relevant today, because the way people talk about difficult topics hasn't really changed. The structure of these conversations, the way voices rise, the way understanding remains just out of reach. It's still happening in different forms in different contexts. Personally, I find these episodes both fascinating and a little unsettling, because they don't offer the comfort of resolution. They don't let you walk away feeling like everything has been neatly wrapped up. Instead, they leave you with questions, with emotions, with a sense of something unfinished, and that can be uncomfortable, but it's also what makes them memorable. There are moments where you might feel frustrated with every character in the room, where it feels like they're all missing something, all failing to connect in a way that seems just out of reach, and that frustration is part of the experience. Because it reflects something real, something about how people communicate, how they struggle to bridge gaps, how they can talk for so long and still not fully understand each other. As the episode ends, there's no big conclusion, no moment of clarity, just a quiet return to normal. The living room settling back into its familiar rhythm, the conversation fading but not disappearing entirely. And that's where the show feels most honest, because it acknowledges that understanding isn't always the outcome, that sometimes the best you get is the conversation itself, the expression of different perspectives, the attempt to connect. So when you sit with that final moment, when the voices have lowered and the room has grown still, it doesn't feel like the end of a story. It feels like the continuation of something, something that extends beyond the screen into your own thoughts, your own experiences. And maybe that's the real power of it, that it doesn't promise understanding. It doesn't guarantee resolution. It just shows you what it looks like when people try and fail and try again. And in doing so, it creates something that feels real, something that stays with you.